Today we'll be discussing how to start recording a song in your home studio. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. So you want to get started recording your first song in your DAW in your home studio. Now there are a few key things that you can do right now which can dramatically improve the process of recording that song and make your life much easier. So I encourage you to watch this whole video so you don't miss any tips or tricks. And if you're a seasoned recording engineer, then you still may find a few things quite helpful. But before we get stuck into that, if this is your first time here and you like this kind of content, all about home recording, DAWs, plugins, gear reviews, that kind of thing, then please do help me out by subscribing and ring the bell on YouTube so you get to hear about my future videos. Now, on embarking upon this process about figuring out the best practices for when you start recording a song in your DAW, I decided to have a chat with my good friend Vache from recordingstudio9.com, one of my favorite YouTube channels where you can get these kind of tips and tricks. So please do check out his channel and I'll put a link to it in the description below. So I had a chat with him during the week and this is how it went. So I'd like to give a warm Perth welcome to my friend Vache in Sydney. How are you, Vache? How's your day?
Very good, Mike. How are you? Good day.
Boiling over here in Perth. How's the weather in Sydney?
Well, it's pouring down rain, flooding everywhere. But other than that, it's all good.
So the reason I really wanted to speak with you today is because I know that you've been recording since around about 1987. I seem to remember you telling me something along those lines. So the beginning of starting a recording is an all too familiar sort of concept to you. But I just want to ask you, for beginners out there, how do you start? How do you just start first recording?
Well, preparation is probably the key to everything. Like in anything, you really need to prepare yourself. Of course, knowing what you want to record, whether you're recording a singer-songwriter or two people or a whole band, 4 or 5 people. So you need to know what you're recording first and then be prepared for it. And in these days, we're talking about recording in a DAW, of course. And for that, you really make it easy if you start creating templates for yourself.
Okay, so I know that there's going to be a fair amount of templates which come along with the DAW. I know we both use Studio One, by the way, but
yes,
from my experience, having used some other DAWs, they tend to come with some templates.
Yes.
But what kind of main templates would you recommend people kind of make?
Yeah. Well, personally, I actually just skip all of the templates that they provide. I mean, sure, do have a look at them. And if there's something that will meet what your recording requirement is, and you can certainly use them. But I personally, knowing my workflow, I try to set up my own template. It also depends on what gear you've got, like the audio interface that you've got and how many microphones you want to connect and the outputs, headphone monitoring and so on. So creating your own, it makes it easier for you because you know exactly what your base starting template is.
Okay, so you need to think about, I mean, I guess a lot of people out there will be using the same sort of arrangement of instruments and things a lot of the time. And I know a lot of people perhaps be using, a guitar and a vocal and perhaps be using some virtual instruments, some piano, some drums and those kinds of things.
Yep.
I know the vast majority of people watching our channels are going to have a kind of a smallish setup like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got the template set up, which is going to have some basic inputs for probably vocal, instruments such as guitar. What about effects? Would you have effects on at this point?
I normally have, depending on the template. Let's say if I've got a template for a singer-songwriter or someone that's going to come in, play the guitar, and sing to microphone, I will have at least 3 guitar tracks ready and maybe a couple vocal tracks ready, and then buses, which we're going to talk about later, and effects channels as well. And then I will put the default compressor, EQ, and reverb effects and delay effects in my template. So it's all ready to go. I don't normally turn them on, but that's there already. So if you're using a certain type of, let's say, compressor that you get to see that you're using all the time, just have that in the template. So you're not searching for it from your million plugins that you downloaded, most of them, the free ones. You always get to sort of feel some of them is what you like. So you have them on your tracks so that when you start the mixing session, they're already there. You can straight away start. So that's what I do with my template. So I do have compressor, EQ, and probably a couple of reverbs, room reverb, plate reverb, delay, analog delay, and maybe a couple of buses as well, all set up, ready to go.
Okay, so I guess I'd sort of interject there, and for those people who are thinking, "Oh, this sounds like housekeeping and a little bit boring," one of the things that I've kind of done in the past is, say I'm planning to record, say, an EP with a few songs, and often there's a typical kind of setup there. You don't really have to sit down and go, right, I've got to make a template for all of them. Just record your first song, which will introduce, certain amount of instruments, which will be typical, and then use that song as a template for your subsequent tracks, right? Would that be the kind of thing you do as well?
Yes. I mean, if this is the first time ever, obviously you need to have some practice. So you need to sort of see what workflow works better for you, and which plugins you like, which reverbs you like, which compressors you like. And after doing a couple times, you get to go, oh, well, that's what I normally do. So start a fresh project, and then add all the tracks that you think you would need for certain recording session, add your effects, and then save it as a template. So next time you want to start recording your song, instead of starting fresh, blank, empty project, load your template and start recording that way, and then save it.
Okay, that's good advice. Good advice. Now, you did briefly mention a couple of things, and those were buses and VCA. So let's have a quick explanation of what a bus is for the noobs out there, Eddie.
Yep. Would you like me to take on, or you want to explain?
I'd love you to do it, because it's nice for someone else to take on the burden sometimes.
The easiest way to explain buses and why do they exist, even from the first days of mixing consoles, is to direct a group of microphones or instruments into one channel. So that way, by controlling that one channel, you can control a whole group of microphones. So, like, in the best example I can give is the drums. So your drums, you've got 6, 7, 8, 9 microphones all around the drum kit. So you balance them all out how you want it, and then you group them into a bus. Basically, all of those channels will just be mixed down to a stereo bus. And that way, if you want the drums to go up or down, you need just one slider going up and down. And you do the same for, let's say, the guitars, and then the bass guitar, and then the keys and the vocals and sound effects and everything else. And in the old days, we had up to 8 buses that we could work with as a submix. So you can easily turn the guitars up and down without trying to find that guitar channel and turning up and down to balance your final mix. So that's what I could consider what buses would be. And of course, the buses would feed to the main channel output.
Yeah, and I guess some of the other things that I sort of do on a regular basis, and you mentioned drums, but just to put it in a little bit of context, let's say, for example, you've got a song with a number of brass instruments in it. You might have a trombone, a saxophone, trumpet. Sometimes what I'll do is put all of those through one bus or a VCA, which we could sort of get to later. And then you can go so you've got a brass section, you may have a string section, for example, as well. And then what you can do is, once you get those in balance, you can then treat them as a whole section, as you were saying with the drums. And this is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it makes it much easier in the mixing phase later. I even finally go down to 2 VCAs, which is all of the instruments end up finally through one VCA, and the vocals on a different VCA, and then I can just balance the vocal to the backing as my final part before I go into my master. People will do things in different ways, but I have touched upon VCAs, so I'm going to give it to you to explain what VCAs are now.
Maybe you can explain what VCA is, since you use it quite a lot. Let's hear it from you, Nick.
Now, I should have prepared for this a little bit, because I've got a working knowledge of it. Certainly the difference with VCAs is they're not actually an audio channel as such. There's no actual audio going through them. I tend to think of them as kind of, you can correct me on this if you like, Vache, but I tend to think of them as a kind of a remote control for other faders. So as I say, you can't actually put any effects on them. You couldn't put a reverb or a compressor on them, but they become very, very handy when you want to control groups of faders together. And although this is not strictly required at all at the beginning of the mix, and we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves because this is in the mixing phase,
it is.
Nonetheless, because you, after a little experience, know you're going to use them, then you would tend to have them in a template as well, or at least I do. I tend to have them in my templates. Yes. I know there's going to be people asking, why would you even bother using a VCA? Why not just use a bus? And there's a really good answer to that, which I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well,
embarrassingly.
It's the VCA comes from the old days, from hardware mixing consoles. It allows to control the faders remotely. So when the faders are motorized, so they move without even you touching it. So by moving one VCA fader, it actually moves all of the connected channel faders in relation to each other up and down, where the bus is actually a channel in itself, that the input is coming from all of the other channels that are assigned to. So that is pretty much the difference. So that adjusting the VCA up and down, you see the faders go up and down, not in sort of a linear, but with the relationship to each other. So you can see the faders sort of go up and down in that sort of a manner, rather than just say same levels. And now we know that faders control volume. So that's what you are doing. You're controlling the faders rather than just the bus.
Yep.
For it. Hopefully that explains a bit more. But I guess if people want to find out a little bit more how it actually works and what VCA stands for, voltage controlled automation, if I'm not mistaken, but you can correct me on that one. But that's what VCA
I think
stands
you're
for.
correct in that, but please correct us. That could be another little mini video in itself about VCA buses. Going back
again, just a final note on VCAs. You probably don't need VCAs unless you've got lots of channels.
Yes.
There are instances where I do have projects which have 40, probably 50 tracks that I have to mix, and VCA becomes really handy in that situation. But if you've got 10, 12 tracks that you're working with, or up to 20 tracks, you probably don't need VCA. A bus will do just fine.
Excellent. So getting back to our templates, I did mention at the beginning that this sounds a little bit like housekeeping, but I want to continue on the theme of housekeeping, because you tend to learn through experience, and difficult experience, that some good housekeeping really saves you a lot of time during the recording process. Whenever you're recording, mixing, the whole process is going to be helpful. So when I talk about housekeeping, I'm talking about naming tracks sensibly, color coding, that type of thing. Perhaps you can tell me a little bit about how you organize your templates.
Well, again, once you've got all the tracks that you think you're going to record, color coding, as you mentioned, is quite important as well. I tend to color code, again, the group of instruments together, as well as my buses. It's really a visual indication of where things are at. Because once you start adding, become 20 tracks or more, you don't want to scroll and keep searching for your bass guitar. It's purple. I
Yeah.
like purple for the bass.
I always go,
Um,
bass is always orange for me, but there you go.
yeah, whatever the preference is, as you mentioned, and naming is really important right from the beginning. And I tell you why. Because as soon as you hit the record button and you're recording your tracks, the file name is taken from the track's name.
Yes.
So don't start by track 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and name it later. Name it right at the beginning before you hit that record button. So that way, when you look at your raw files in your DAW, they already have the right naming in them. And that makes it really easy for, again, backup situations and general housekeeping.
Yeah, it's really good advice. I know some people, and this is really what a template's for, but they also just have in the habit of, say, drum tracks starting at, say, channel 8 onwards, and always occupying, say, from 8 to 16 for the individual drum tracks, and the bass will always be on channel 2, the vocal is on channel 1, however people like to organize it. And that makes it really good if you keep to those kind of habits, because as you work through from, you might have many projects to work on at a time. It just becomes very intuitive to know exactly where each instrument is within your mix. Of course, there's going to be some variation, but and another thing to think about, and I know this is something that perhaps a lot of people are not going to experience quite yet, but if you're using like a digital controller, like a what we call them, the MIDI controller, and usually you've got, say you're using the Presonus fader port 8, and you would have it in banks of 8. Then it can be quite handy, for example, if you go to bank 2, that that it will be, say, all drums in there, or that
That's
kind
right.
of thing.
Yes.
It just makes it easier to organize. So the sequence of the tracks, you don't have to follow anybody else. You really can set your own rules with that through your experience.
Absolutely.
But it's just I used to do it different for each song, and you sort of end up scratching your head about looking for
Come back at 12 months later, and then you go, why the hell did I set it up this way?
Exactly. So and also just really meaningful names as well. I know it's tempting to sort of abbreviate and that sort of thing. Perhaps some of us don't have the greatest of typing skills, but just take those extra few seconds to make some meaningful names. Rather than B guitar for bass guitar, how about just call it bass guitar?
We've got that option. I don't see why we shouldn't be able to. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, let me ask you a question. When you have your templates, do you have your effects channels in there as well? Yeah.
I do, actually. Yeah. I mean, because I've found a number of effects, say for vocals, I use a lot of vocals and acoustic guitars, and I've found some which I think are a really great starting point for me. I don't generally have them switched on. I also have a vocal side chain, which I always like to use. So I tend to have that set up as well, because that can be a bit complex to set up every single time. I think you've got to be a little bit careful with doing that, in that, you want to use the reverb which is suitable for that type of track, or the compressor which is suitable for that kind of track. Otherwise, I suppose, first of all, it may not be suitable for the track, and second of all of your songs may begin to sound just the same in terms of production. But generally, you're going to have a few of your favorites, which are good starting points. So I certainly do have those. And I have them switched off at the moment, obviously recently I made a video about my new interface, the Studio 192. So there's a little bit of a different situation there because I'm using an effects chain, which is in the hardware itself, if you like. So that's a bit of a different thing. But generally, yeah, I suppose I come from an older time where computer resources were also not as plentiful as they are now.
Yes.
So you didn't really want to be having all these plugins switched on all of the time during your tracking.
Yeah.
I have got a bit of a new computer which seems to take everything that I throw at it. But if you are working on perhaps an older computer and perhaps a laptop or something like that, then it's worth thinking about, because there's nothing worse than dropouts during recording. You can lose a really good performance because of a dropout, and dropouts are going to happen when your system resources get pretty low. So I tend to be in the habit of being mindful of that, even though my wonderful computer can handle anything, it seems.
Yep. But there's one thing that I definitely have in every of my templates, and it's always on, and it's on my main bus, is a limiter.
Right.
Even when I'm recording or during the mixing, the limiter is there with a ceiling of maybe minus 0.6 dB.
Yep.
Just so that for any reason, anything goes wrong in my DAW, something loud coming in or some VST instrument coming in all of a sudden loud, I don't actually blow up my speakers. The limiter will actually hold that down. So that's one thing I always have it in there.
I've learned something there. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but it sounds like an awesome idea. I'm a bit wary of anything on my master bus in general during recording, but that sounds like a really good use of a plugin, which is not going to affect the sound so much.
No, because it's the threshold is way too high, and it's nowhere near any limiting or compression or anything that is happening with that limiter. It's just a safety thing that I have all the time.
Good stuff.
And also, I think in the last probably about 3 months or so now, all of my templates also have the SonarWorks reference 4 at the end of the chain as well. So that way, during recording and mixing, I'm getting a clear indication of how am I recording. And if people don't know what SonarWorks reference 4 is, maybe you can put a link to them, because that is, I'm not, obviously we're not sponsored or anything with them, but that's a software I use that controls my speakers as well and how I listen to that speakers. But if you don't have that limiter, even the basic limiter in Studio One, you can put it right there, and then that will make sure that you're not going to go over. And if you start seeing reds on your main bus with the limiter there, something is too loud.
Absolutely. Good advice. Now, we're not really touching so much upon sort of recording levels and things like that now, but I just want to very, very, very briefly say that this is going to be obviously a massively significant part once you've kind of set up your DAW ready for a recording, is as you record each instrument is to have an appropriate level. I think we're going to discuss appropriate levels a little bit in more our next video. And I think we've both probably made some videos already on that, so I'd encourage people to check out both of our channels with that. But I want to kind of close off a little bit with one last sort of question for you, I suppose. So the people have got their DAW set up. They've created a template. Perhaps after already recording 2 or 3 songs, they've kind of refined their template for their use. They're getting ready to. They've perhaps recorded a couple of, say, a bass guitar, an acoustic guitar. So they've got a bit of a backing going, and they're going to record the vocals. Would you normally start to introduce some of those effects as you start, as you're tracking, but you've created some backing already. Would you switch some of them on? Or?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes, usually, it's for the instruments. I leave them as they are. I might add a compressor if I feel the need that needs to have a compressor in there. But I definitely won't include any EQs because I don't want to shape the sound of what is being captured. Um, because a lot of the time, as in my case, when I'm recording, I've probably heard that song, 20, 30 times within a couple hour period. So my ears are already tired. So I try not to EQ, just leave them as
Yeah.
they are. Just a little bit of compression if it needs a little bit of lift to support the vocalist in feeling the great music behind his vocal.
Yeah.
And if it's the other way around, so if I've already got the vocal tracked and we want to add, let's say, some guitar, the solo guitars in there, then I might add some compression to the vocal just to bring it up. A little bit of reverb, doesn't matter because that's going to change later on. A little bit of reverb so the guitar player that's playing the solo will have some good feel of the vocalist so they can really, feel and record a great take. So
Yeah.
other than that, it's just for the taking. Later on, I'll go into detail during the mixing stage. I'll go into detail whether that compressor is the right one for that instrument, where the EQ is the right one for that instrument, and so on. And that's at the mixing stage. That's probably a topic for the next video.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my attitude towards it and everything you said there makes sense to me. I also think it sort of a little bit depends on both your own experience or the experience of the performer who's in the studio. So my approach when I record people who have, perhaps it might be the first time they've ever recorded anything, they perhaps don't understand the process at this time and kind of comprehend that some of the magic's going to happen a bit later on. And to sort of boost their confidence a little bit about how the process is going, I'll try to give them not so much lots of effects or anything like that, because there's probably not need all the time, but a decent kind of mix, sort of a mix as you go kind of thing, so that they're singing against something they feel confident about, because
ambience.
Yeah, some sort of ambience, because there's nothing worse than someone having to sing or I'm talking about singers mainly, because it's such an emotional process, with them having niggling doubts in their mind, why doesn't this sound quite right, or those kind of questions in their mind. You want them to have a level of confidence that, hey, this is going to sound great, when this is when I play this to my friends and family or release it, this is going well. So that's more of I suppose I'm indicating, giving them a temporary mix to go on. If it helps them, let me use an example. Say a core piece of the production is that the snare is going to have a massive reverb on it, or a gated reverb like Phil Collins used to use a lot. And that's core production value, and we've planned that that's going to be there. It may be helpful to throw something like that on, just so that they get a feel of, okay, yeah, this is how this track's going to sound that I'm singing against.
Most definitely. Yeah.
But I have to say, for me personally, having recorded for more than a couple of decades, I actually record everything pretty dry and leave it dry, because I don't need that confidence boost. I've got a pretty good idea about how things are going to go in the end. So, it depends where people are at. I think that's a good place to finish. I should have explained probably that we'd like to do this as a kind of a regular thing, myself and Vache, and perhaps with some other people. Of course, we started off today with a real nice starting point, and that's just starting off your project. There's a lot to be said about actually recording, and I think we may move into that in our next session. So that will hopefully be in about a month's time or so. If you'd like us to do more sessions like this, then please give us encouragement in the comments. If there's any questions at all that you'd like to ask about the topic today, then don't hesitate to ask. I always say, if you ask, then you're actually helping someone else who may be too shy to ask the question. So please go ahead and ask. And I think myself and Vache will jump in there and try and help out as much as possible. But for now, I'd like to give Vache a big thanks for joining me today. I had a really good time.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I learned a couple of things. And, you know, it's always nice to learn something from someone who's the same age as me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's all experience.
Normally I'm learning from someone younger than me.
Yeah, I mean, what we'll do, here's an incentive for you guys to comment. If we get enough comments, what I will do is I might share some of my templates with Mike, and then maybe put it in the description as a file for Studio One Pro, obviously. But I can set up even for an artist version. So if you have the artist version of Studio One, I'll make sure that they work as well, so that you're not sort of going, oh, what are they talking about templates? You know, how, what? So maybe if you help us and Mike with lots of comments and lots of likes, I will share maybe 2 of my templates. Then by opening in your Studio One, you'll be able to see, that's what Mike was talking about, VCA, what VCA is. That's what Vache was talking about when he was talking about the buses and the effects channels and so on. I think that's a good incentive, don't you think, Mike?
Well, definitely. And on the subject of VCAs, I'm absolutely sure that somebody watching has a much better definition of VCAs than I gave. So please go ahead and give that in the comments, and I'll definitely give you a shout out in another video. So thanks very much, Vache. I'll say goodbye for now, and we will see you next time, and have an awesome Sunday night, what's left of it.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for having me. Till next time.
Bye. So folks, I hope you found that useful. Now I hope to be making more videos like this where I chat with some of my friends about their experiences with recording in order to help you with their experience. If you'd like to see more of that kind of content, then please say yes please in the comments below. Please tell us about your own templates and how you start recording a song in the comments below as well. It's about sharing ideas, folks. So if you like this video, then please do give us a like, subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you can see my future videos. If you didn't like it, then please do hit the dislike button twice, and I will see you in the next video. So I'd like to give a big warm welcome to my friend Vache from Recording Studio 9. How's Sydney today, Vache?
Good day, Mike. How are you? Very good. Sydney is very good. How's Adelaide?
It's not Adelaide, it's Perth.
Perth. Why am I thinking Adelaide? Let's start that again. Why am I thinking Adelaide? It's Perth, of course. I'm getting confused with another guy. All right, let's start again. Take two.
Excellent.
Good exercise, huh?
I'm glad you stuffed up and not me. All right.